Yeah. We're good? Zoom's ready? How you doing today? Good. Welcome to the MEM Community Forum. It's such an honor to see another group of graduates. I was walking my young niece and nephew across campus just now, and they said, "Oh my gosh, you're going to go see some students present?" I said, "Yeah." They go, "What grade?" And I go, "I think 18th." So we're going to celebrate the 18th graders this week. And I just want to thank the graduate students for their hard work in representing the School of Environment and Sustainability around the world. These second-year master's projects are really the culmination of all the learning and action that's possible out of a university. And we're really proud to have this model here at Western. So you want to think, you've heard me say this before, but every year our second-year grad students complete together 25,000 hours of work for environmental organizations all over the world. So let's just thank all of the second-year graduate students for that. It makes them the true face of Western, not just the School of ENVS, but the true face of Western, extending the reach of what's possible when learning is turned into action around the world. So without further delay, welcome our first panel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Ophaug.
I'm Kendall Cox.
And we're excited to talk to you today about outdoor recreation usage and condition inventory. A little background: across agencies, land managers need increasingly access to data that has to get sourced by boots on the ground, but later analyzed in the office to provide them with better tools for making management decisions.
So a brief overview of my project. I did a visitor use study on the Alpine Loop. For those of you who are not aware, the Alpine Loop is a four-wheel drive backcountry byway that runs between San Juan and Hinsdale counties and connects the towns of Silverton and Lake City. It's all on BLM administered land, so it's really important for the BLM Gunnison Field Office to understand exactly what is going on the Alpine Loop right now in terms of recreation so that they can better manage and justify their budget expenditures.
And for my project, I worked as a resource assistant for the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Regional Office, helping to implement and project manage a accessibility condition inventory. So looking at accessibility compliance for developed recreation areas. So in campgrounds, does the slope meet grade? Is there a drop off from the parking pad that a wheelchair can get through within the letter of the law? So basically utilizing ArcGIS Online and a tablet-based infrastructure to kind of crowdsourced through a crew of AmeriCorps survey members, all of this data to feed into decision-making in the longer term about how to come into compliance and how to look at some of those areas in the longer term as they think about, redoing kind of decaying infrastructure, older campsites, or what they close or open in the future. A lot of those sorts of decisions this data will help to feed into. So through that project, I helped project manage that and then do a lot of analysis and work with ArcGIS on the back end to try to figure out some of those answers.
So yes, together we did overall just a lot of hours sitting, monitoring, counting cars in my case, which is just as exciting as it sounds, and a lot of field research that then turned into a lot of time behind a screen. But all in all, the data we gathered is really important for land managers to make their decisions.
And ultimately fueling into the sustainable recreation strategies that both the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service are trying to get behind in terms of future planning.
I hope that was 5 minutes, so here we go. All right, so you all have a little bit of a background into exactly what I did with my project, but I wanted to go ahead before we dive into the project with a little story. I presented this same information to both the Hinsdale and San Juan County commissioners, and like Eric and I said, it is a lot of numbers. It's a lot of graphs, charts, tables, not always the most exciting stuff compared to the actual field days, but this type of information can be really useful for the people who are living in these areas and need to know this in order to plan out their future. After I presented this to one county commissioners meeting, there was actually a very heated argument that broke out for about 10 minutes between a member of the public and one of the county commissioners, and they just kept going on and on. It was a little bit intense, and I was sitting out there pretty awkwardly like, okay, what do I do? And finally I butted in and said, well, regardless of how you choose to use this information, I was glad that I could provide this tool for you. And there's like a little small pop because it was not that many people in attendance. But it is really important to know that this is a very good tool, not just for land managers, but for people living in the areas. So with that, we'll go ahead and hope the clicker works. My project goals with the visitor use study were to assess the exact amount of visitation in terms of just the plain numbers, the type of visitation, whether that be trucks, cars, non-motorized, etc., the location of the visitation, so where different people were coming into the Alpine Loop from, and their overall visitor experience, which we assessed using the visitor use survey. And this little thing, just to get you a small taste of the Alpine Loop, this is Corkscrew Gulch with the sun coming up over the mountains. It's beautiful. Go check it out, but maybe not during peak season, which you'll figure out soon. So our study design, our visitor use level estimation, we used magnetic traffic counters that we buried in the ground at several different locations along the Alpine Loop. You can see here, this is me downloading the data from the traffic counters. We also did direct observation where I sat in the Jeep and counted cars to field check the magnetic traffic counters as well as to see the type of vehicle rolling by, because our counters don't give us that information. We could also estimate the number of people in the vehicles as well as where they came from using state license plates. We also did dispersed campsite monitoring, so we did a campsite inventory, saw where the different campsites were on the Alpine Loop, and about how many times they were occupied and by what types of campers. And finally, our visitor use survey. We used a Government Performance Results Act survey, which is just the BLM approved surveying system that people can use. It's a short 50 questionnaire that people filled out, but it gave us a good overall impression of people's attitudes and perceptions of the recreational opportunities here on the Alpine Loop. So let's start with that first goal, overall visitation. We saw we had approximately 160,000 vehicles on the Alpine Loop just in this 4-month season, with about 1.97 people per car, so 313,396 total just people. Our busiest day of the year was here, July 21st. I'll show you some traffic patterns later and we can investigate maybe why that was such a busy day. And our slowest day was May 30th with only about 200 people on the Alpine Loop. Our visitation by entrance zone, our entrance zones represent the areas people come from on the Alpine Loop, so the different towns or regions. So you can see that Lake City is our most popular entrance zone with about 46% of people leaving Lake City to get to the Alpine Loop, followed by Silverton. I'll point out that this Highway 550 is only 12%. It represents the Ouray area in general, but it does connect to the state highway, so it could be from other places as well, not just Ouray. Our total season traffic, this is broken down by the different entrance sites, so where we had our traffic counters buried. You can see that Howardsville is our most popular entrance site. However, that is actually in the Silverton entrance zone, not the Lake City entrance zone. This is County Road 2 coming right out of Silverton. So you can see that that's the busiest area in general, but Henson Creek and Lake Fork are also very busy, and those are on the Lake City zone. Everything else, less than 10,000. Important, but those are the 3 main entrance sites. Next, we have our total monthly vehicle count. Not surprisingly, July, August, and September were the busiest months of the year on the Alpine Loop. However, June, we think, might be a little bit slower this year due to the 416 fire just north of Durango that shut down the highway for a little bit of time. The San Juan National Forest closed. People were kind of confused about what was open and what wasn't. So we think that the numbers might be a little lower for June this last 2018. However, it could be comparable to a heavy snow year like we had this year with avalanches closing parts of the road by Lake City. So it'd be interesting to compare last year to this year and to see what happens in terms of snow and fire on the Alpine Loop and visitation. Next, our traffic by day week. You can see there's only a 4% spread between Saturday and Wednesday, which suggests to us that the Alpine Loop is a destination location and people will come no matter what day of the week it is and possibly stay for multiple days at a time. However, when you compare that to the shoulder season versus main season, you can see there is a slight spike on the shoulder seasons just on the weekends, which says, hey, maybe not so much a destination on the shoulder sides. However, I want to point out we did have 2 3-day weekends during this season that happened on the shoulder season, so Memorial Day and Labor Day. And we didn't have any 3-day weekends during the main season, so that could be a contributing factor to that. So next, our daily traffic. You can see some events that correlate with spikes in the traffic. Memorial Day, the San Juan National Forest closure, you see a plateau followed by a big spike when it reopens. July 4th is actually a divot because it was on a Wednesday, but it picks up the next weekend. July 21st, our busiest day of the week, we had both the FJ Summit coming out of Ouray, Colorado, and the Hard Rock 100 Run. We had the Ouray 100 run the next weekend, and you can see there's a small spike on that Ouray kind of area. And then Hard Workers Holidays, Labor Day weekend in the OHV Valley had almost as much traffic as our busiest day of the year, so that's a really important event going on in the late season, followed with several spikes during peak fall colors. So next, we'll assess our next goal, which is the types of visitor use we saw. Lots of Jeeps, 15 of them in that row, in case you're curious. Quite a traffic jam. Not surprisingly, we had it broken up about half and half between highway vehicles and OHVs, so off-highway vehicles, with less than 1% as non-motorized traffic, 0.33% bikers, 0.28% hikers, 0.03 equestrian. That's not that exciting. We only saw 3 horses all year. Not a lot of horses out there. Highway vehicles make up about 50% of the total. Jeeps, trucks, SUVs are the most popular. Rental Jeeps only make up about 4.4% of the total use. However, if you say that the average rental Jeep costs about $200 to rent, that's approximately $1.4 million in revenue to the Alpine Loop just from rental Jeeps. Our off-highway vehicles, so these are side-by-sides, razors, dune buggies, etc. UTVs is hugely important. That makes up 30% of the overall use. So almost a third of the use on the Alpine Loop is just from UTVs, which is bigger than trucks and SUVs combined. Rental UTVs you can see is only about 2%, but those cost about $335 to rent. So that's approximately, let's see what I say, $984,000 some odd dollars. So that combined with our rental Jeeps is approximately $2.4 million in revenue just from rented vehicles, plus all the other accommodations. So that's a major contributing economic factor to these small towns. So historic traffic comparisons, I mentioned earlier that we were a little bit afraid we had a smaller year due to the fires in June. So we went back and compared it to some of the data that we had previously collected. So these 3 sites you can see, Corkscrew actually almost doubled its use from 2015 to 2018. Eureka was about 1.3 times higher in 2018, whereas Stony Pass stayed approximately the same. So there is a little bit of a growth we're seeing there. And then compared to 1997, Lake City, you can see, is still the most popular entrance zone. However, Silverton has grown about 5%. So you can see it's becoming much more important of an entrance area compared to Lake City. Will you turn me your water bottle real quick?
Okay.
Excuse me, folks, I've got some allergies going on. All right, so comparing the entrance sites, you can see that Henson Creek and Howardsville have both increased almost 3 times what they were in 1997, and overall we see an increase of about twice as much traffic in 2018 as we had in 1997. The overall types of use, this is hugely important. You can see in 1887 it was majority 4-wheel drive vehicles. That has shifted to where now UTVs make up 30% and 4-wheel drive only makes up 38%. But that's a 100% increase in those 20 years because UTVs didn't even exist in 87. So that's a huge shift that we're seeing on the Alpine Loop. Then finally, we also had our dispersed campsite inventories. You can see we only saw about 2,500 campers this year. That seems low to us. So I would suggest in the future maybe doing a more intense campsite inventory study just to see what's going on with that. Again, not surprisingly, July and August were our busiest months of the year. However, June could have been affected by that fire. So something to keep in mind. Our camper types predominantly were tents and camper trailers. However, this 8% is van and car campers. So I would see maybe in the future a growth in that category because that's becoming more and more popular with millennials like me. And I'm allowed to say that because, like I said, I'm one. So then our distribution of campsites is about half and half on the Lake City side and the Silverton side. You can see the most popular areas are here in Cunningham Gulch, at the base of Minnie and Maggie Gulch, right around Animas Forks, which is an old ghost town, and then right here, Grizzly Gulch or Burroughs Park. That's where those 14ers, Sunshine, Red Cloud, and Handies are, so a lot of people are camping up there. But it is split about evenly between the passes. And then finally, our DIFRA survey results. Just to remind you, that's the government-approved survey that we had people answer with the questionnaires. Some interesting trends we saw that correlate with what we were observing in the field. There's an increase in sightseeing. There's an increase in hiking, which we didn't actually see that, but maybe. Driving for pleasure increased, and also riding and driving OHVs increased, whereas camping had a slight decrease, so maybe those numbers are reflective of that. I don't know who's voting up there, 1%, someone is. Useful maps and brochures, as well as public awareness of rules and regulations, both increased in the very good category, something that we've done since 2014 when the survey was originally done. We produced a new map and brochure, so that's suggestive that these are working, the public really likes that new material. Conditions of roads, I just included this because it was a super subjective question. Some people thought it was great compared to the wagon routes that used to be there 50 years ago. Some people said, oh, just pave the whole thing. It's not worth it. So that question was really subjective depending on what people's baseline for what a four-wheel drive road should look like. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. You're always going to get those types of questions and answers. Managing the appropriate use of vehicles also increased in the very good category. However, providing sufficient law enforcement increased in the average category, which doesn't sound that bad, but average is about as low as people are willing to go on these types of surveys. So something we noticed there, we didn't get the grant approved to have an Alpine Loop Ranger during the 2018 season. So we can take this data and say, hey, it's really important if people want to see more law enforcement on the Alpine Loop. Give that to grant providers. So finally, I just want to sum this up with this quote that gets back to what Eric was talking about in the beginning. It's really important to have this type of information and know what is happening in the areas you're managing in order to properly manage not just the recreation going in there, but the natural resources that people are going to see in the first place. And with that, I just want to give a couple thank yous. Thank you to my community sponsor, the BLM Gunnison Field Office, Christy Murphy, as well as Megan Mast, Jim Lovelace, and Scott Jackson, my MEM project advisor, Sally Bode, additional project funding from John Margie Haley, as well as the Western Colorado Conservation Corps, and additional support from my undergraduate assistant, Hannah Hansen, GIS support from Amy Eaton, and other support from Patricia Scripney, Ryan Lieberman, Doug Shaw, Caleb Chastain, Dr. Knapp, Dr. Armstrong, and my folks. Thank you all. I don't know if that was 15. I can talk to you some more. Cool. Okay, so we have a little 5-minute question and answer session here. People have questions. Or I can sing, I don't know. Yeah.
It was a great project and really nice presentation too. I just wanted to find out, so it looks like visitor numbers are increasing over time. What did you see kind of on the ground, just being out there, types of impacts? And what do you think the BLM should do to sort of manage increased use?
Yeah, something that I saw and we actually addressed during the season, the popular stopping sites where people would go, like the top of Cinnamon and Engineer Pass, there'd be a lot of people parking their vehicle off-road and in the high alpine tundra, which is a really fragile ecosystem. So actually during the season, especially on Cinnamon Pass, there ended up being a bunch of boulders moved to block the areas where people were parking off-road. But that's one of the bigger ones I saw, just wherever there's an attraction, people will park off the road to access it.
Is the BLM or anyone doing, where you said like June possibly was down, is this being extended to a 3 or a 5 year count in any way in order to actually tell if that's down? Are you putting the magnetic strips back out or anything?
We're actually trying to put those out this year, but we now have another issue is that it looks like Henson Creek will be closed coming out of Lake City. So our visitation is going to change dramatically this year. But we're going to see if our visitation increases or stays the same. So we'll put them up at the same locations that you put them up.
And the reason Henson Creek is not being put up is because that's where one of those big avalanches out of Lake City came through and knocked down a bunch of trees, I'm guessing. No, that's
like many, like countless numbers of avalanches.
Whole bunch. Okay.
Which county did you have the altercation in, Sam, or instead?
I don't know if I should say.
Well, I'm not asking you.
It's a public meeting.
There's public records.
All right. Just curious.
Yeah, it was quite feisty. Yeah.
Was there any, I know the UTVs or the side-by-sides, that's more popular than ever.
Oh, yeah.
I've been up there camping. was there any thought of trying to limit that type of use or any of the noise impact? Or I also know that people in Lake City are generally happy that
Yeah.
they have that use. Was there any addressing of that?
Yeah, so Lake City, there's a state highway that runs in between the actual pass and the town. And they're right now trying to get like a bypass going so where UTVs can go straight from town and not have to dismount because it's illegal driving on the state highway. So there is some of that going on. People are kind of trying to cater to the increasing UTV use. Silverton has UTVs allowed in certain routes in town. They have to be under a certain like noise parameter. But in general, right now, there isn't any kind of restrictions that I'm aware of on the Alpine Loop specifically in terms of noise or numbers of UTVs. Good question.
I was curious if the like ATV and vehicle use is up, is that due to the roads increasing? And are we able to understand if that has anything to do with camping being down? Or is that just, there are too many variables that might go into that?
That could be something that would explain it. With the UTVs, more people are able to do the loop as a day trip as opposed to maybe before with a truck, you'd have to stay overnight if you wanted to do the entire loop. So that's maybe a possibility, but now more people are like able to access the backcountry quicker.
Did any of your survey questions look into conflict between user groups?
We did have some, but there wasn't any kind of significant findings from that. Overall, the general satisfaction with the Alpine Loop was about 95%, 4.9 out of like 5 stars. So people are still pretty happy.
Do you see a change in the vehicles being used depending on the weather? Like whether or not it's like wet outside or if it was over
There was no dirt bikes when it was cold. Actually, seemed to be slower traffic on the rainy days, but I don't really have any kind of statistics showing if there was any kind of correlation with that because there were still people getting out and after it. I was one of them counting them. So, yeah, good question. But one more. Oh, no, we're done. Cool.
Hey, once again, I'm Eric Ophaug, and here to talk about the accessibility condition inventory in the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest region. A few project partners on this, obviously, Eastern Colorado University, Northwest Youth Corps, which is the Conservation Corps organization in Oregon and Washington, who was sort of my sponsor as a resource assistant for the U.S. Forest Service, as we see listed on there. Oh, and actually, just to backtrack briefly, this is a little photo of part of what we'll see in action. You can see he's taking a photo of the picnic tables there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So some background on this project. So in 2017, direction was given from the Washington office of the U.S. Forest Service to the regional offices to start conducting accessibility condition inventories to assess where they are at for compliance with the law. Has anyone heard of Americans with Disabilities Act? That passed in 1990, which broadly affected accessibility issues on state, local governments, and businesses. The Forest Service as a federal agency falls under the Architectural Barriers Act, which passed in 1968, and yet most facilities are not compliant still. There's a lot of work to be done. So basically at some point someone said, hey, let's get moving on this. So there's an expectation for compliance or to develop transition plans. The law doesn't say you have to be compliant tomorrow. You have to have a plan for how to get to compliance. So you can still work that into general maintenance, to longer term planning for areas. And so to that end, a National Forest Service accessibility database was developed, which was a Survey 123 app through ArcGIS Online, basically a way to utilize tablets in the field to collect this data and aggregate it into one database to inform that future transition plan. So a few objectives for this project from the get-go. One was for me to provide project management on this survey work. I was pretty fortunate just through some networking. I was basically able to plug into a position that had a need to be filled. Someone kind of retired at the last minute that was going to be leading this project. And the regional office had been planning to implement this project, but all of a sudden we're a little short-staffed on having people to do that. I had a background in recreation and accessibility, so it was kind of a good fit that worked out there. And I was fortunate, it was a project that was funded for the work and the survey crews through Northwest Youth Corps. So there were 12 AmeriCorps members who did most of the survey work. I participated in some of the survey work as well. You can see a couple of them up there on the right. And basically worked across a variety of forests in the Northwest. A few of the other goals, so to manage that, to facilitate a successful integration with recreation.gov. Who here has ever reserved a campsite on recreation.gov? Kind of goes across several agencies, the Forest Service being one of them. But this year there was a need to overhaul recreation.gov as they switched to a new server host. But basically the Forest Service, through a bunch of hoop-de-doo, hadn't signed a good lease agreement on their intellectual property like 10 years ago. So they basically had to get new photos and data for all of their campsites. So for the regional office, this was an opportunity to utilize all the same data to feed into that. So that was an important part also. Additionally, to process and analyze these data to look for future targeted improvements, and to develop recommendations to be included as a part of those future transition plans. So the methods broadly went into utilizing that data through the tablets, monitoring that data for quality assurance, quality control via ArcGIS Online, and then to share and connect with other Forest Service regions to see what they're doing, if there were opportunities for improvement or ways to better work with these data. And then ultimately providing those transition plan recommendations at the end of the project. So once again, the tools used for that, the FSAD, which is a Survey 123 app. Samsung Tab S3 was the type of tablet we used, along with a BADELF GNSS, basically a GPS unit to provide higher resolution GPS data at each of these sites. And then a few traditional tools. They had a smart level, a measuring tape, a pressure gauge for doors to be able to test the pressure on like a bathroom door to see if that meets compliance. But the big picture, what are we talking about here? So we have the Forest Service Pacific Northwest region covers Oregon and Washington. So that includes 16 national forest units. And basically the scope within those, this was funded out of some fee-based recreation use, basically dollars that have gone into campsites to be used for future maintenance. So through that scope, we had to work within developed recreation areas that were on the reservation system, recreation.gov. And within that, a full accessibility condition inventory was given for facilities operated by the Forest Service. So that was about 25% of the sites we surveyed. 75% of our survey scope was concessionaire operated sites. And so those ones, based on the fees, we weren't able to do that full accessibility inventory. So for those sites, we took all the metadata. So basically, what forest, district, recreation area, campsite number, the GPS data, photos, all those things I mentioned to be able to use that for recreation.gov. So here you can see mapped through ArcGIS Online. The green dots represent reservable Forest Service operated sites. So every green dot was a place that we did basically a full campground loop that we did a full accessibility condition inventory. And I'll get into a little more about what that means in a minute. The purple dots represent reservable but concessionaire operated sites. And then the black dots represent other recreation sites that are not reservable. So that might include things like trailheads, things like that. Systems diagram, we don't have to get too deep into the weeds, but basically our data came from a combination of Infra, which is the Forest Service infrastructure database that they use to track various things related to campgrounds, things like that, and then also recreation.gov. And basically we had the Forest Service operated sites, which got the full accessibility inventory to feed into transition planning, and the concession operated sites, which just went to recreation.gov data. So a quick overview on some of the results we had from the project. So there were 370 developed recreation areas, mostly different campground areas that were surveyed. About 91 of those got the full accessibility data out of them. And you can see, about 6,000 plus campsites that were surveyed across the region. Some of the main features, I'll show you a full list of all the features that were surveyed later, but the main ones were the numbered campsite, a picnic table, a fire ring, a parking pad. And so for each one of those, the law has a lot of specifications in a developed area about what you can have. So for a fire ring, you need to have 48 inches of clear space all around it. Firm and stable surface, so someone could walk or roll without tripping around it. For a picnic table, it has to be accessible with certain height dimensions for a wheelchair to roll up to the side of it. And for the parking pad, you can't have too much of a drop off. I think it's more than 2 inches is not compliant. Excuse me, more than half an inch is not compliant. So often if you think of parking pads, if you've ever been to a campground, it's blacktop, maybe it was laid 20 years ago and you get erosion on the sides, there's a 3 inch, a 4 inch drop off, and that's not compliant. So I have a couple of tips in here for land managers also that we figured out to help work towards that. Bottom line, so we found 3,627 total non-compliant features. So things like the parking pads, picnic tables, so on. A few of the heavier hitters were picnic tables and fire rings, and then just under 500 parking pads that were non-compliant in campsites. A big takeaway from this, out of this 2018 process, the regional office is going to utilize some of this data to look towards some of the easiest fixes where possible, using some spend down strategies and also longer term planning. I'll get a little bit more to where some of this is going in the future towards the end. So this is just an overview of all the forests that were surveyed. So each of those numbers represents basically a developed recreation area, a campground that had all these surveys. You can see that Deschutes National Forest had 65, which is the most surveys. But again, that was not the accessibility data for most of their sites. Theirs are mostly concessionaire operated. The Okanagan, Wenatchee, and Washington had 41, and they were primarily Forest Service operated. So we'll dig a little deeper into that. And here you can see the Okanagan, Wenatchee, the Siuslaw, and the Umpqua all had the most accessibility data. And that's just based on they had the most Forest Service operated sites. So we got the most useful data out of those areas. Interestingly, you can see the percentage of non-compliant features is actually quite proportionate to the ones with smaller sample sizes, which I thought was interesting. And this is another interesting point. We also got to check out the Eagle Creek campground, did anyone hear about the Eagle Creek fire in the Columbia River Gorge 2017? It was started by a teenager playing with fireworks, but did a lot of damage. Really important area. But anyways, this was closed off for that. We were able to survey the area, and you can see some of the burn scar in the slopes here still. And here, just another look at that type of data. So you can see in gray, that's total features surveyed. Green is features that are compliant. Red, features that are non-compliant. So again, you can see the percentages a little easier across the forest that way. So to dive a little deeper on sort of the four main features, the most common outliers were parking pads, ORARs, which is an outdoor recreation access route. Basically, the trail from like a parking pad into a campsite is defined as an outdoor recreation access route. The fire rings and the picnic tables. And particularly, you can see here in the Okanagan, Wenatchee, really high levels of non-compliance on those features. And we'll see as we look forward. This is some of the types of products it provided to the forest, not the most exciting to look at. But basically, this is the transition plan in a nutshell. Kind of looking at each of these represents individual camp units, where in this case, fire rings were non-compliant. So if you looked at the Mineral Springs campground, you can see that sites 2, 6, 7, 8, and 9 all had non-compliant fire rings. And I used two primary indicators for why they were non-compliant or what type of work might need to be done. So in the case of fire rings, we had all these measurements about the clear space, the grill surface height. You can see this fire ring on the right side is a very classic fire ring, maybe 12, 16 inches tall. Well, not even, it's like 8 inches tall, the ring itself. And the cooking grate is about that height. So that's not compliant by the letter of the law. You need like a 17-inch, I believe, minimum height for a cooking surface, such that someone in a wheelchair could be able to cook on top of it while seated. And so, many camp rings are that way. So like I mentioned, they don't need to be replaced tomorrow, but in the longer term, they either need to be replaced or modified to meet compliance by the letter of the law. So that's like what this one's indicating. This right column indicates where that clear space is non-compliant. So a need for 48 inches of clear space around fire rings. And so basically what that is an indicator of is that it's more basic maintenance work. Brush, dirt, rocks, maybe there's a log in the way, those kinds of things that could actually be done quite easily to be in compliance. There we go. So looking into the Siuslaw National Forest, one of those other 3 ones that we have the most data for. A couple things that stand out on this one is a much higher percentage of noncompliance on the outdoor recreation access route. One main reason for that, the Siuslaw is a coastal forest in like central coastal Oregon, so it has much sandier soil. So it's really hard to maintain that firm and stable surface that you're required to have for like a traveling path. Otherwise, again, 98% non-compliant on fire rings, which is basically the same as the Wenatchee. And then here, just looking at all the features that were surveyed, so there were 24 different feature types included in this survey. This is looking strictly within Forest Service operated areas at the number of features. But within that, you can see kind of those main hitters: the fire ring, a hydrant, so that's like water fountains. Some of those A lot of those are non-compliant because of the type of knob they have. It has to be something that someone with a closed fist could push with less than 5 pounds of pressure. So that's what the majority of those are indicating. But again, parking, picnic table, the major outliers from that. So what did I learn from this? What did we learn from this within the agency? Some challenges and opportunities. Firstly, the analysis and utility issues based on the database design. Basically, this database was designed to gather data very well. It's through Survey 123 and ArcGIS Online. It does an amazing job of harnessing that data, of using a smart form system based off the way the law is written. So you're really capturing very quality data that's organized right. It's very hard to have user error with that data entry. But it was designed with like site-specific analysis in mind, so you could zoom in to campsite 35 and see what that fire ring looks like, see all the numbers on it. But if you're sitting there thinking, well, what's happening with all the fire rings in that campground or that district or that forest? You don't have the tools set up for that. And it's kind of, to get into GIS speak, it's in a geodatabase that's really large, so you can't really utilize it very well because it'll crash a lot if you try to shift these files. So that was one problem. I'll get to where we worked through that. Another problem was the furlough. So I was working for a federal agency, so kind of got shut down for a while. Fortunately, I was able to get back to work and continue on this. Then the other one, which I mentioned, was providing analysis across scales. Because to make this data useful, it really needs to tell the story at a feature-specific level, a site-specific level, across the whole district, across a forest, or even at the regional level, depending on scales for funding, for planning, for maintenance, those kinds of things. So the opportunities. Through this project, after seeing a lot of those challenges, I worked a lot with some very GIS and database developers to look at new technological products, data viewers, ways to make this more useful for a field manager and to view data across scales. So some of that work is ongoing, but we're getting closer to having that stuff ready to be rolled out. And also looking to connect it into other databases to funnel into the user interface for people on the reservation system. Just quickly, these are a couple of products I produced showing some techniques for getting into compliance in some of these issues. I'll just breeze over those, some references. Briefly, some acknowledgements. My supervisor, Brad Conover, is the regional landscape architect for the Forest Service in the Pacific Northwest. Sally Thode, my mentor, advisor, Northwest Youth Corps, all of the Western Colorado University faculty, students, and my amazing support wife, Solde, family and friends. And yeah, any questions?
So great presentation and a great demonstration of how much work goes into an MEM project, my goodness. Question about costs. So 3,276?
That's the number of total features across each of those feature types that were non-compliant.
I'm kind of testing myself to remember the number.
That was very good.
Do you have, and obviously costs are going to vary based on, you mentioned it could be budgets that are for maintenance, it could be budgets for just total redos, or do you have a guesstimate as to how much that might cost?
Well, it's a good question, and I think I don't have an estimate on that total amount. It's across some feature types, and I think it kind of varies a lot by site. So things that are like a static permanent object, like a fire ring or picnic table, those, fire ring's about $200, a picnic table somewhere around, I don't know, $200 to $400. But again, those aren't things that have to be replaced right now in every case, so they could prioritize it based on ones that are rusted out or need replacement anyways, those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, those are not insignificant. Other things are, some simple dirt work to flatten out and smooth out a transition or pack it down, which might cost a lot less just in some staff time. But yeah, obviously it's a big term thing, a big cost thing in the long term, which is part of, I think, why they need the data to be able to speak to that. There's a lot more to analyze here, and that's sort of what I was getting to with working on some of those other GIS products. Because basically I used 4 of the primary attributes that were the heaviest hitters for non-compliance, but there was 200 different types of accessibility attributes to analyze with that stuff. And because we couldn't really use a technological solution when I did all this data analysis, a lot of this was basically like Excel work. And so there's a lot more to be done there that can tell more of the story, I think, also.
Yeah, so I just had a question. This might be naivety on my part. With the Disabilities Act, does every single site need to be up to par? And I'm just thinking with federal budgets being what they are and getting cut, would it be helpful to designate specific sites that are up to par and then not have to do that work across the
Well,
whole spectrum?
It's a good question. So it's pretty complicated, kind of the letter of the law, but basically areas that are developed need to be, unless there's like an exemption reason, and exemptions could include things like a CCC structure, you know, something historic or things like that. But basically, if it's a developed, like paved area, it needs to be in compliance. And again, it's not that it has to be in compliance now, but you have to have a plan for it if it isn't in compliance.
So, and with that, is there an action plan for making these into compliance, or is it gonna go under deferred maintenance?
That's a good question. So basically, this is going to feed into that transition plan. So, because basically, developed recreation areas which fall under this that need to be in compliance, this is maybe 10% of developed recreation areas in Region 6 that we surveyed for accessibility. So there's a lot more work to be done. So this was also kind of a pilot about, does this program work? Is this going to be a useful system? Which I think, yes and no, we kind of proved it worked great for collecting it. We're figuring out how best to use that in the future to analyze it. But yeah.
So do you feel that the managers and the people working on the ground are really unaware of ADA and what it requires for the sites to be managed? I mean, is that why so many sites are not?
I think it's across the board, you know, I mean, because these represent like a wide spread of campgrounds. Some of them are highly used, you know, closer to urban areas or more developed. Some of them are very backwoods and like reservable, but see less maintenance or, you know, use, so like less. I think it just depends on the actual manager themselves. I think there's been a movement towards providing more trainings on those sorts of things within the Forest Service, but you know, I think it's tough. I think it just takes learning more over time to figure that out.
So I'm quite amazed at the information you pulled together, and it sounds like you need a lot more still. And there's a lot of recommendations you have for the Forest Service. It sounds like a lot of money and a lot of manpower that's gonna have to go into it. So with that being said, do you have public recommendations for the public to be making sure that they're doing things that are responsible? And maybe that the public can help do some of this without actually having to fund?
Well, it's a good question. You know, the other thing is some of the agencies look at decommissioning over time. I mean, that's also a potential for some sites, you know, if it's seeing low use, those kinds of things. But these are expensive fixes. They're not short-term fixes. But the way the law is written, the cost of money is not an exemption. So while there are a slew of exemptions you could apply for, money can't be one of them. So that's a good question as far as for the public, because these are, you know, I think advocating is probably one thing that can be done. Perhaps grassroots support, but it's kind of a bigger wicked problem that can make that tough, I think. I believe we are all out of time for my portion. I think we'll jump in together.
Yeah.
If anyone has questions for our broader panel at this point.
I will make one comment about what Eric did. Aside from all of the surveying and all the data and whatever, he moved and changed enough or did enough research and whatever into the system that the Forest Service uses to do these things. It was stuck, and they couldn't figure out how to move it forward, how to move the data and the techno stuff forward. And Eric opened that up for them. Okay, so he was a big help with their technology, and not just the surveying, not just the data. So congratulations.
So going back to the campsites and everything, if these are public lands and you were talking about getting people like educated on the sites and everything, is there parts that we could do to educate the public while they're at the campsites to help curb some of those maintenance caused by, you know, the weeds are encroaching on the fire ring and stuff, having them cleared and use it for kindling?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, there probably is a lot of opportunity. I guess I didn't delve into that too much in my project, but I think that's a great point, that there probably could be a lot of resources that could be provided, whether it's on an entrance sign or, you know, local user groups, volunteers doing a training, and also perhaps there's ways to look at, you know, adapting some of those fire ring grate heights or something to make them in compliance without needing to replace that fire ring. I think that's a good question.
I want to ask a cross-cutting question. So since the main theme is about technology, are there technologies that aren't invented yet that would have helped you, that you could have thought of that could have really supported your projects?
Great question.
Good stall.
I'm sure there are. Mostly just if there's better ways to use Microsoft Excel to work. I mean, I think Eric and I both learned some tips and tricks with Microsoft Excel with along with Googling. But there's a lot of things I think would have been cool if I could have. The system we used was Traffic's DataNet. And it would have been nice if I could have uploaded my traffic and so we could see the actual flow of traffic, whereas I kind of just got estimates with that with Excel, but it would have been nice to see where cars were going somehow. That's not invented.
Yeah, I guess for mine, the types of GIS tools that I've been trying to work with far more advanced developers than I, because I'm not a developer really, but I know enough to like be dangerous, but like trying to figure out some of those tools that would better display and analyze and report on the data, just because it was kind of this very complex database that was built for it. Yeah, if those were around, that would have been great. But no, I think pivot tables in Excel are something I'd never really worked with. Those are, for people who don't know, it's basically a way of pivoting some of your columns or rows and attributes from a GIS database export around so that you can sort them differently. Those are worth checking out if you're working in that area at all.
I was wondering how your experiences, both in your project and in the MIM, have informed the way you look at recreation on public land and what you're both doing next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like the MEM definitely kind of forces you to take a broad look at what you do know, what you don't know, what your assumptions are about those issues. Obviously, it's like focused on interdisciplinary work, so that definitely was the case for me. I think I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing next. I'm basically on a contract extension for this resource assistant position to help wrap up some of this work while I try to find a permanent position now. But I'm kind of interested in something either within GIS or developed recreation at the moment, with the Forest Service probably.
I would say my MEM experience kind of has made me look more at the should we do stuff instead of just can we do stuff, and really think about how much you want to extend your human influence on certain systems and to what extent it's good for the system and helps the system as to what extent it ends up being ultimately detrimental. And I will be working with Gunnison BLM Field Office this season. Great.
Looking at both your projects, would you use the same process that you used to do again what you did? And if not, how would you change it?
Hello.
I would. Part of the struggle with mine is I kind of got jumped into my project like go, like they were trying to confirm funding for it and get this resource assistant thing approved. And so I basically started like a week before we started training our survey crews. So I was like just hitting the ground running, and it would have been nice to have more time to frame up project management planning and how to do some of that, because it really just like hit the ground running very fast. So I would probably use the same process, but like having a little more time to plan that out would have been helpful.
I think I probably would have done the same process too, but now that we have a baseline, I think it's easier for us to maybe go in and just do a couple of sampling days instead of 5 days a week of sampling and looking at everything, because that's a lot of resources put into that. So now that we have the whole thing in place, we can just kind of sample some days along there.
Kendall, my question's for you. You are one of our first 3+2 students, which, by the way,
She's the first to graduate.
So for the audience,
We'll see how she does with this question.
how many undergrads do we have here in the audience? All right. Oh, that's a lot. How'd it go? Could you tell us about it? Could you tell us about the benefit of being a 3+2 student and how it flowed into your MEM experience?
Yeah, I think it would, I mean, I'm here, so I survived. So I guess it went well. I think it was really nice too. I think there's a little bit of overlap, so I kind of came into the program with a step ahead. I think my ENBS 400 really helped to frame the way that I thought about my whole MEM project, because it's just a EMBS 400 project, but on steroids. It's a lot bigger, but then I was also able to use some of the classes I took in the MEM program to help start thinking about my project, because I knew what it was super early. So I was able to use that and kind of step into it. So it wasn't too overwhelming, thankfully.
Anybody here a junior? So Kendall, it was, I think, this week, 2 years ago, as a junior, you were like, oh, I can do 3 + 2 and start in a month. So if you're a junior and not in 3 + 2, come talk to me, you can probably figure it out. Thank you for that setup, Scott. Let's not end with a shameless plug, though. Can we do one more question? One more substantive question? I think maybe Bryce has one, but maybe someone could bail Bryce out and ask their own question. I'm just joking, Bryce, you're fine. Let's do one more question. Yeah, Will.
Did you notice any litter trends in your areas? Any significant things that stuck out as you visualized the lay of the land?
You said any litter trends?
Yeah, like they're concentrated in one area, or there was a lot, or there's not that much, or how would you characterize the litter situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and obviously that's an issue across public lands, varying degrees. I would say definitely the forest closer to urban areas in the Pacific Northwest, closer to Seattle, Portland, have a lot of homeless camps that tend to move through, and there's a lot of litter from that. And also, I don't know, I mean, that's a hard question to answer though, because you see high schoolers out partying in the woods too. I think there's a lot of issues around that, but I would say probably the ones that see the most use are often the more clean also, because there's more maintenance or more people kind of self-patrolling those areas.
I didn't really look at that in my project at all. I did, occasionally you'd see like a water bottle on the side of the road, but that wasn't really the main detriment from recreation that I saw. It was mostly people driving off-road. You would occasionally see a maybe historic kind of trash pile off the roads, because there's a lot of mining legacy in that area. So it's hard to tell exactly what is litter and what is history.
I had a question, kind of a big picture, maybe wrap up or where we're going next, but I think we probably all heard that our public lands are being loved to death. And both of your projects were about the impacts of use. So are you coming away with this with any ideas about what needs to happen for public lands, how we can support public lands better? How much all of our use, because we love our public lands, we love to recreate on them. What are some going forward thoughts now that you've completed your projects?
Question. Well, I guess I would say, in my case, this was all about developed recreation areas that are fee-based. So those are obviously a great introductory place for people to become comfortable, and especially accessible areas. It's not just for people with wheelchairs, it's for everyone who isn't comfortable getting out there, whether they're old or young or a first-time camper. And because they're also fee-based, they pay back into the system to help support those areas. Obviously, funding can be a struggle for all public land agencies. So I think supporting those types of areas is a good thing, but obviously that's also not the recreation experience that everyone wants. And a lot of our backcountry areas are being loved to death as well. So I don't know that my work gives the answer to that question necessarily.
I don't know if mine does either, but because I'd say the vast majority of what my project looked at was recreation in developed areas and on hardened roads, hardened sites. So while there was some off-trail driving, the vast majority of it was on those hardened resources. And so maybe that's something to think about with increasing use, is hardening more resources so that the impacts are less on a more concentrated area and a bigger area can stay slightly less impacted. So just concentrating use, I guess, is something to think about.
I feel like that makes me think also about GIS becoming increasingly used for many things, being a more useful tool for that management and seeing where people are going, where they're not going, what those resource damages are.
Very good. Well, hold your applause for a second. We're doing something new here. So they came into this room 18th graders, right? They're going to leave masters in environmental management. Hold your applause. And I do this every year where I say this, but I always feel like I'm knighting people when I say it. It's really strangely ritualistic, and so we decided I need something resembling a sword in the knighting, And so each graduate now gets a pen, Kendall Cox with their name on it, in a lovely embossed wooden case. I'm not gonna do the knighting, don't worry. So, please join me in congratulating 2 new masters in environmental management. True masters of their craft. That was beautiful. Thank you. And you get about a 15-minute break, and we're going to return at 9:40 for attending transitions.